In the state of Illinois, the conversation over fair maps has taken center stage. And joining me now is the local politician representative that is pushing it this go round, Representative Ryan Spain. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Eugene.
All right, so this has now been submitted. You submitted it just last week.
Right.
This is a conversation that comes up, it's seemingly, at least since I've been here, every other year about how can we create fair map districts as far as the voting public here within Illinois, and it falters every time. What gives you hope that this time it can be any different?
Well, if you back up and just think about the history of this initiative to have fair maps, take the politicians out of drawing our legislative districts, really empower independence in that process. It's been years in the making, and probably the one thing that a lot of people will remember is several years ago there were nearly 600,000 residents in Illinois that signed a petition saying, let's make this change and let's vote on it in the November election. So that was well more than enough to move that kind of amendment forward, but it was shot down really on a technicality by a partisan state Supreme Court decision. And so that effort faltered. And so now we've been regrouping over the last several years. And one of the things in Illinois, you can sign petitions to begin a constitutional amendment process, or you can have the state legislature initiate that process on its own. And when you do the latter, the legislature has much more broad latitude on how you would construct that issue and what would be considered for a constitutional amendment. So this effort would be standing up to any legal challenges, but in order for it to be successful, we have to get the legislature to vote to put this item on the ballot, and that's always been the challenge.
And speaking to that challenge, do you believe that we are at the place now where that will happen?
Well, I'm hopeful, and there are a couple of reasons for that. So in previous years, I've actually proposed this constitutional amendment each year for the last 3 years, and I've been the lead sponsor. I'm giving up that sponsorship now because we have a Democratic legislator in the House of Representatives who is going to lead as that sponsor, and I'll be the chief co-sponsor. I don't care how this gets done as long as it gets done, and this is really the last chance for us to make this change. And it's very important that we do so for the state of Illinois. So on the one hand, I'm hopeful because we have a new Democratic sponsor for this initiative. I think that will be helpful. And then we also have a new governor. And when Governor Pritzker was elected, one of the things he campaigned on is that he would support an independent redistricting process with an independent commission.
You mentioned that right now it's important for the state of Illinois. Why so?
Well, the timing is urgent. So this is 2020. It's a census year. And so we'll take the census in April and then conclude our activities on the census throughout the summer. And then after those population counts are identified, we are now obligated to conduct the redistricting process to draw new legislative districts for state legislators and for our members of Congress. And that would take place at the very next election. So if we're ever going to do this, this is our last chance to get it done, or it's another 10 years leaving this issue lingering for the state of Illinois. And I think if you look at the performance of our state, you know that we're in desperate need to do some things differently. And we need to have better leadership, better bipartisan cooperation. And if we wait another 10 years to do it, I really worry about what our state looks like at that time.
What would you say, in all honesty, has been the primary pushback within legislature not to do this?
Well, I think that any party that is in power that controls the majority really uses the map-making process as a way to solidify and control their power in the state legislature. So I understand why there may be some reluctance to give that power up, but you have to, again, look at the performance of the state of Illinois, all of the challenges that we face, and things aren't working in Illinois, and this is an important change that needs to be made. Not so that we can elect more people from one particular party, but anyone that comes to Springfield representing their districts are really aligned and incentivized to work together to solve the difficult problems facing our state.
All right, can you give a breakdown exactly for people who may not be familiar with the type of process we're trying to create here? When you talk about an independent team that goes about and placing these maps, How does that work? How are those people selected? And then what are their duties in fulfilling?
Sure. So our amendment actually creates a 17-member redistricting panel. And so it's comprised of equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans, 7, and then 3 independents. And one of the things that we've created in our amendment is that we require that any vote on a final map, after dozens and dozens of public hearings and outreach and making sure that we comply with the Voting Rights Act at a federal and state level, making sure we protect communities of diversity, both racial and language groups, making sure that they're empowered to be well represented. But any final map that would come forward has to be a consensus and a compromise that involves Republicans, Democrats, and independents supporting that effort.
And how would those independents be selected, those 3 independents?
So the independents would be selected through mutual agreement with the top 2 justices on our state Supreme Court. They have to have bipartisan agreement on that. And actually, we make sure that there's also geographic representation throughout the entire state of Illinois. So we want to make sure we have bipartisanship, we have independence, we have really the diversity of our state, which is a strength of Illinois, reflected in every aspect of this process. And again, at the end of the day, what this is about is saying to future generations, it is not appropriate for incumbent politicians to select the voters that they will represent. It should be exactly the reverse. And we want to have the voters empowered to choose their elected officials, not the opposite.
All right, and you mentioned earlier that obviously this is a census year. So we're looking into this process, and that's why you're saying this is as time as any that it needs to take place. Let's say everything goes according to your desires in this go-round. How quickly could this team get put together, and how quickly could they be a part of the process to remapping Illinois?
Yeah, most of their work would occur in the first part of the year 2021. And so the hearings that they would conduct throughout the state, the research and outreach that would take place as part of this independent commission would take place in 2021. So that the 2022 election would be the election with new legislative maps in place. Now, this is going to happen either way. The question is, do you want the current incumbent politicians to draw those maps themselves? Or do you want to have a new fair approach that other states are doing? Illinois is an anomaly in the way we draw our maps. Do we agree that we should take the politicians out of selecting their own legislative districts?
Last question I have for you on this. Do you think that it is actually going to get done this time?
I'm hopeful that with a new Democratic sponsor, with the commitment of Governor Pritzker, the governor is obviously very interested in constitutional amendments. He's supporting other activities on the ballot. This item has to be one of those issues. I can't imagine any scenario where you would say to the voters of Illinois that we will not allow you an opportunity to weigh in on what the structure of your government looks like.
All right. Representative Ryan Spain, thanks so much for coming here and talking about this topic.
You're welcome. Thanks.
All right.